All right, thank you for joining us. This is a joint study session of the Sausalito Marin City School District and Willow Creek Academy Board of Trustees meeting on Tuesday, July 21st, 2020 at 5:08 p.m. We're going to call this meeting to order. Mr. Weinsheimer.
Great. Yeah, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the joint study session between the Sausalito Marin City School District and Willow Creek Academy on July 21st. Thanks.
Wonderful. Can we get a volunteer to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Got my flag ready to go. Anybody? Anybody? Well, join me then. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Dr. Garcia, can you remind us on why we're here in this special meeting? Our
yes,
guidelines
indeed.
for a public presentation.
I sure can.
Toka, you've developed a southern drawl in the last week.
It's not hard. It's not.
That's exactly what I said to him earlier in the week.
Oh, wait a minute.
Eating all that Bama food.
Oh, yeah. I think I avoided losing weight when we did the first shutdown, but all of that effort was killed by spending in Alabama. So, yes, once again, welcome. Thank you all for being here tonight at our joint board study session, part 4. It is a study session of the Sausalito Marin City School District and the Willow Creek Academy boards. It is open to the public. The public can observe but not participate in the meeting. So we will take one round of comments from the public prior to starting. Just want to ground us in our guiding principle, centering the option that is best for kids and families. Our goals are to collaboratively study the unification plans, provide guidance for community feedback, build trust and communication. Once again, I'd like to welcome Dr. Satterwhite. Thank you for being here with us, Dr. Satterwhite.
My pleasure.
He will play the role of facilitator, process observer, and timekeeper, further wanting to ground us in these historic times in the conceptions of race, equity, and opportunity, acknowledging the Attorney General's complaint that our district received the first desegregation order in California in 50 years, and that running separate schools perpetuate these conditions. It is our vision that this will generate a recommendation to the board, both boards, having considered the advantages, disadvantages, issues, concerns, and feasibility of a unified school solution, that we are collaboratively developing a unification plan that engages all of our stakeholders and builds consensus, and that we still aren't making any decisions, that we are consulting with local public boards and outlining potential options for a single school solution, along with any related findings, proposals, recommendations, or consideration in the spirit of consensus building, collaboration, and community engagement. I'll take a pause there and allow for public comment. Please raise your hands if you would like to make a public comment to the board. This will be your one and only opportunity to comment tonight. Oh, I will recognize Lisa Bennett first and Yasmin McGrain second, and continue to scan for hands. Lisa, please, we'd invite you to comment. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I just want to say I was struck by a comment that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made when asked about the unification of the Democratic Party. She said, the whole process of coming together should be uncomfortable for everyone involved. And I want to commend us all for acknowledging that discomfort and going there and continuing with the process anyway, because this is how it should be. And I hope that by doing this work together, we can emerge stronger. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that in the age of COVID, there are students who probably are not doing as well with remote learning. And I would hope that any of these plans that either with or without unification center the needs of the children who are suffering the most with remote learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to recognize Yasmin McGrain. Welcome, Yasmin. Thanks for being here.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, and we can see you too.
Oh, there you go. Hi. Hi, it's Yasmin McGrain, and thanks for having this session tonight. My comment is really all to make sure that our time tonight is focused on true unity, really coming together. And for me that, and I think for a lot of people, that really means seeing things from both sides and finding the best way to come together as one community. As we probably all know, there's still some fairly entrenched groups, in particular in our community around governance. I think we've worked through so much of the other areas around facilities. There's still a lot of work to be done, but this one thing I'm really happy that you're tackling as one item tonight. But there's still comments such as it won't be done right if we're not governing, or it won't be done right if they are in charge. And we really cannot have this be about us versus them anymore. I just want to remind us all of that tonight. With true unity, there really is no us versus them. It's just us, really. We are one community, and we really need to act in all areas like true unity stands for. We need to act like it for the first time, really, in a long time. And I know everyone here tonight is fully capable and wants to do that. There are great ideas that come from both sides, from anywhere. I know I've seen them. I know you've seen them. I know that they're there, and they really we need to celebrate all these ideas from no matter who they come from. We need to hear from all the sides and truly, truly listen. We need to not think of them, just as us. We can do this if we can approach this with positivity and also with a genuine desire to do what is best for all, not just some. I actually can know this can really actually be no longer about sides. I really ask us tonight and going forward to look to the students, to the kids of 94965. They don't see sides. I think we all know that. I really encourage us to get their input, to listen to what they have to say, what they see, what their needs are. I also encourage us to look to our principals, our two amazing principals, and all our beloved and smart and dedicated teachers. They really see our kids through more of the waking hours, I think, than any one of us. They listen to our kids. Some of them are already working together, already unified for the sake of the kids and in the service of providing equitable education for all. Teachers have some massive contributions to make to these discussions. I would highly encourage us to seek out more of their input. I would actually say much more of their input. But mainly just focus on true unity, I hope, tonight, not your side versus their side. There can be no sides anymore. Let's all meet in the middle, and get this done. The delays in the name of governance are robbing us and all our kids of the chance to unify sooner rather than later, the chance to learn and to grow together, the opportunity to build real trust, which we all want. Real trust will come, in my belief, faster when we're actually doing things together, not talking about trust. It will not be perfect. It could get messy, but to me, I think it'll get messy no matter what time we do it. We will learn together, we will get better together, and we will share our triumphs and our setbacks together. That's what really coming together, what unity looks like. And I commend you for talking about this topic publicly all together tonight. And I really hope to see lots of unity tonight. So thank you so much.
Dr. Garcia, is there other hands that are up?
Thank you. Yes, there are.
Great.
I'd like to recognize Kirsten.
Before Kirsten comes back on, I just wanted to circle back. This is just a discussion. There are no decisions that are being made tonight, correct? We're just listening to each other and we're having a discussion. No decisions are being made tonight.
That is correct. We may engage in some consensus building as we have done in other sessions, but we will not be taking any action. That's right.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kirsten.
Hi, everybody. Kirsten Thomas. Nice to see you all. You know, after I've been along with you here for the ride the past 4 evenings, and everyone's got an incredible amount of stamina. So thank you so much. We're all coming in. It's 5 o'clock. We're coming in with like a fresh minds here. And I know by the end of these study sessions is when I really feel like I have a lot that I wish I could share and say with you all. And I'm kind of like empty at the beginning and then I start to fill up. But from what I recall of how I felt during and after the last sessions, I wanted to take a moment to share with you, as a listener, member of the public, community member, parent, I think there's 4 things that I'd really like to hear tonight, and I'm hoping you can take that into consideration. The first is, while the trustees are just clarified, there's no decisions being made tonight, and that's great. These are just study sessions. I get it. I would like to hear recommendations from the folks who've been truly steeped in this for so long, and that's the Joint Unification Task Force. I would love to hear their recommendations, not just options. Second, I would like to hear less fear and more possibility. I've just heard a lot of questions, a lot of what can't work, what won't work, and things like that. I'm actually sitting here, I'm listening for what's possible. And there is an amazing school plan that's possible here. So I'd love for that to come through in this discussion. Third, I'd like to have COVID not be a reason for not moving forward. I'm hearing that a lot. COVID is a huge thing we're all dealing with. I get that. COVID cannot be the reason to not move forward with our commitment to unification. Let's just, pull the Band-Aid and get done what has to be done, COVID or no COVID. And finally, number 4, I'd really like to hear race and be front and center. We are fundamentally here because of a desegregation mandate. We have important things about our district that need to be looked at and need to be addressed, and need to have kids in mind. And race is part of that, whether we want to talk about it or not. So let's just get it on the table and acknowledge what is going to work and not work for the kids of color. And let's be very open about that. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'd like to recognize Jenny Smith.
That's me. Hi. So after being at a couple of different meetings, I start to feel like y'all have heard what I have to say before, because there are so few teachers who are participating in this fabulous opportunity to be heard. I know tonight's conversation is about governance. That is not in my wheelhouse. right? So I've said that before, like, I don't want to be the one to make your decisions. And I love and appreciate the incredible time commitment that you're putting into moving this process forward. All of the things that you've talked about, I have thoughts about, but I'm not the boss of it. Just the way that, like, you wouldn't come into the classroom and say, do it like this, Jenny. And I appreciate that, we're playing to our strengths here. I trust both I trust both boards. I trust that both boards see that unification sooner is advantageous to the kids. As me, a teacher, like, I'm not speaking on behalf of the WCA teachers or anything, but as a teacher, I see this COVID thing really as an opportunity to move forward more quickly, because everything's already topsy-turvy. So I really believe that COVID, well, we're not going to talk about it tonight, I know, is really an opportunity to kind of take cover and get this unification moved forward. I understand that no decision making is going to be made tonight. And I also want to say that I really trust that this, whatever governance structure comes out of this decision, it doesn't have to do with who has more kids and who has less kids. It has to do with all kids. And because I trust the boards and their coming together capacity to put the interest of the kids front and center, I know that you will hold as sort of the priorities and understanding that, these two school redundancies are a waste of money. I know that you will maximize putting your energy forward to the kids, all of them, and particularly, like Kirsten was saying, those who need it most. And while race might be a factor in need, it is not the determining factor in need. Vulnerable kids are vulnerable kids. It doesn't matter if they're black, it doesn't matter if they're brown, it doesn't matter if they're white. Vulnerable kids come in all colors. And those are the kids who we really need to be having front and center. I just want to thank you guys for plugging away at this. And I think, while I don't understand or want to the intricacies of the incredibly challenging work that you're doing, I want to again say how much I appreciate it and how fortunate I feel that that you guys are going to get this done as practically and as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. I don't see any other intent to comment, but I do want to thank all of our other guests that are here, even though they're not commenting, for your interest in tonight's meeting. We are up to 51 participants. So seeing no other intent to comment, I will move us forward. As some speakers have shared, the idea is for us to engage in a cycle of continuous improvement. We will never get this perfect. Getting it perfect must not be the thing that stops us from getting started. In all schooling, cycles of continuous improvement are what get us nearest to perfect. And so we just want to invite everybody to hold that frame. Really, as has been said on several occasions tonight, children must be our priority. Our current reality has changed. Significant, tremendous, unprecedented, unanticipated change. And we have an opportunity, as I read headlines from across our country that frankly I never thought I would read, in the United States of America. We have an unprecedented opportunity to demonstrate what collaboration, what community can do to overcome some of the things that are stressing the very fabric and culture of our nation. And it is a unique and wonderful and beautiful opportunity. And the way that we will do that is by collaborating and continuing to work together to create community. And so I thank all of you trustees. I know you all have full-time jobs, and many of you have children and grandchildren and other things that you're engaged in. And I just want to add my voice to the chorus of appreciation that all of you are making these blocks of times over the past few weeks to have this literally groundbreaking discussion. Dr. Omo, I want to invite you to review the community agreements that we spent time on in the opening session, just to move our conversation forward and line everyone up.
And I will do that quickly to the members of the public. In the first meeting, the joint boards participated in a process to come to some agreement and about the guidelines for how these meetings ought to be conducted and how each one of us ought to show up and participate. And those community agreements or guidelines are: ask to listen, to learn to listen and understand, question our assumptions, but don't assume anything, look through an equity lens, respect each other's voice, be real, share airtime, stay calm and be present, keep an open, independent mind, stick to the agenda and goals, respect and hear out the speaker, ask for clarity, honor, value diversity of opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Omo. So as several folks have laid out, we are here to study the options for governance and hopefully build consensus around what we would like feedback from the community on. Just a quick reminder, oh, I apologize there, that typo is going to annoy me. The California Constitution, Article 9, Section 6, public schools shall include all kinders, elementary, secondary, technical, state colleges established in accordance with the law. In addition, the school districts and the other agencies authorized to maintain them. No school or college or any other part of the public school system shall be directly or indirectly transferred from the public school system or placed under the jurisdiction of any authority other than the one included within the public school system. These ed codes and excerpts from the Constitution are what we looked at last meeting, and are why publicly elected officials under a traditional school option must be the folks making decisions. The ed code goes on to say every official action taken by the governing board of every school district shall be affirmed by a formal vote of the members of the board, and the governing board of every school district shall keep minutes of its meetings and maintain a journal of its proceedings, in which shall be recorded every official act taken. And 35164, the governing board shall act by majority vote of all the membership constituting the governing board. Along with that, we wanted to kick our conversation off tonight. Kurt asked a question when we were talking about governance last meeting, and he said, well, we wonder what our guiding principles are. And we thought that would be a good place to start our conversation tonight about what are our guiding principles for governance. And I want to share with you a little excerpt from the California School Board Association website, which has done a significant amount of interpretation of ed code and the California State Constitution. And what the CSBA, California School Board Association, put forward is one of the pieces I would like to ground this discussion on guiding principles for governance on, which is that citizen oversight of local government is the cornerstone of democracy in the United States. And school board members are locally elected public officials entrusted with governing a community's public schools. The role of the school board is to ensure that school districts are responsive to the values, beliefs, and priorities of their communities. Boards fulfill this role by performing 5 major responsibilities: setting direction, establishing an effective and efficient structure, providing support, ensuring accountability, and providing community leadership as advocates for children, the school districts, and public schools. So I want to invite us to consider those 5 as sort of a bedrock, a foundation of guiding principles, if you will. These 5 responsibilities represent core functions that are so fundamental to a school system's accountability to the public that they can only be performed by an elected governing body. Authority is granted to the board as a whole, not each member individually. Therefore, board members fulfill these responsibilities by working together as a governance team with the superintendent to make decisions that will best serve all students in the community. That is one bedrock of guiding principle that I want to invite you all to base this conversation on. A second pillar, if you will, to switch metaphors, are guiding principles for governance that that we have understood that the Willow Creek Board has used to appoint its board members. And this list was generated by the Unification Task Force. We actually had a significant amount of discussion around what guiding principles for governance might be long before we ever planned this meeting. And so some other potential guiding principles that I want to invite you to consider are accountability, transparency, knowledge, trust, experience, expertise, longevity, inclusion, and equity. And lastly, Marika, in our discussion around governance, you pointed to the synergies and strengths and opportunities of unification as a potential pillar for guiding principles for governance. And so we offer these 3 sort of conversation starters to you all. Those guiding principles pulled from the strengths and opportunities for unification are the resolution of the desegregation of Bayside MLK and the decreasing need for Attorney General oversight and risk of future action. The idea that it will focus public funds towards in-class education, enrichment, and specialty programs, and away from school redundancies and inefficiencies. That we will be able to combine the curricular strengths of both programs. And although it's not on the bullet, I will add, we will be able to have curricular flexibility. It unifies the efforts to maximize achievement for all of our students and reduce the opportunity gap. I didn't want to spend too much time belaboring the point on data, but I do want to remind folks of the data presentation that we did in the first joint study session. The reality is that African American students in our community are not doing near as well as other students. Special ed students are not doing near as well as other students. Latino students and English language learner students are not doing near as well as other students. We really can together reduce this opportunity gap for many of our kids and maximize our energy towards those students away from legal and funding disputes. We can have better prepared 8th graders for their transition to high school. Unification will allow for optimal learning class sizes, increased fundraising opportunities, and success as one unified school. It will standardize compensation and benefits for all staff. As Jenny Schmidt so gently pointed out in her opening remarks, in order for our teachers to do their best job, and we wouldn't dream of getting in and micromanaging their classrooms. Well, maybe some of us that are principals a little bit. But we got to take care of our people so they can show up and do their best for all of our kids.
Right.
And lastly, we want to really encourage a discourse around race, equality, and equity as an opportunity for change in community leadership. Now more than ever, our country needs examples of communities that can come together, that can work together across race, across class, across gender lines. Our country is fracturing at the seams. Every time I make the mistake of reading a headline or an article about what's happening in different places around our country, I am emboldened and given hope by the work that we are engaged in together. And I want to invite all of you to lean strongly into that. Before the police pandemic, before the COVID pandemic, we were talking about being a beacon for other communities. That opportunity increases in importance every single day. So we're going to ask you to engage in a similar activity that you did to create the community agreements, but this time we're not going to go into breakout rooms. Dr. Omawali will ask each board member to spend 1 minute thinking about guiding principles for governance. And we're going to invite each of you to spend 2 minutes sharing your principles and why they are important. And when we have that list of principles, then we'll take a fist of 5 consensus to build consensus around guiding principles. Is everybody clear on what I am asking them to do and what the process will be?
A definition on guiding principles that might be helpful.
I'll say something about that, but Dr. Garcia, your response to the question about what is the definition of a guiding principle?
My response to that question is a guiding principle that is something that we go to and refer to when we make decisions as a board. Particularly when we make hard decisions, particularly when we make decisions that we're not sure about, or decisions that might not be completely and totally popular with everyone, but they're the things that ground and guide our decision making. And that would be my response to that question.
So I would invite you to think about both words. The first word, guiding, and the second word, principles. And with regard to guiding, it's a set of thoughts or agreements that is a lens that you work through as you reimagine, as you frame, as you execute, and as you evaluate the work that you're doing. In this case, the creation of a unified school district. So guiding means that these are the overarching themes or ways by which you will think and work and act and how you move forward together. That's the kind of like the guiding piece. And then the principle piece, principles on the front end of a principle is a value. A value is a belief, something we believe in and stand for. That translates into something to do, which is more what the principle is the to-do side of a value. Toward the end of achieving a certain outcome, which is a result that you want. So principles don't stand alone and in isolation. They are rooted in values and they're directed toward outcomes. And the assumption is that if we have principles and work in that way, that they will allow us to reimagine, to frame, to execute, and then to assess a continuous program cycle, improvement cycle that was described before, in concert and in alignment over time. I'm certain there are lots of definitions of guiding principles, but that's how I think about those terms. Any questions, comments? Just about the meaning of guiding principle.
This is Jim. Thank you, Doctor, for your comments. It's helpful to have additional explanation in this context of what we mean by that. I guess I have a general question on governance and what we mean by that, just to make sure that I'm along the same. I'm on the same page in terms of the term of the topic at hand. And so when I think about governance, I think about specifically the role of a board of trustees, board of directors in executing its governance responsibilities as a body, and obviously with that alignment around the guiding principles of governance shared in common with each of the board members. So when I listened to the first slide that Dr. Garcia shared about guiding principles, it aligns pretty well in terms of principles for effective board governance. I don't remember what it said, but I think about leadership, ethics and integrity, stewardship, accountability, transparency, clear roles and responsibilities, and participation. Those are kind of common board governance principles in a generic sense. The slide that was shared that had a number of different, what I'd consider to be overriding objectives or shared interests, whatever you want to call them, in our unique situation. I guess I wonder how those fit under the term guiding principles of effective governance versus these are the commitments and objectives that we collectively share and that we hope our board or unified board eventually would share, but yet those things need to be developed by whatever the resulting governance body or bodies are. And so we can hope and steer toward those outcomes and ideals, but I don't know if they necessarily are things that I would consider to be principles of effective governance, because there'll be a new, eventually, after everyone changes terms and all that, we're always going to be dealing with new ideas and new objectives. And so I don't know how we can oppose our interests as a two boards on a future to be determined governance structure. I'm sorry if that's not very clear, but it's all around what we're talking about when we talk about governance.
I want to defer to, I'm sorry, yes, please, Superintendent.
Actually, it was me, Dr. Satterwire. First of all, great image in the back there with the Golden Gate Bridge tonight. Love that. But in all due respect, sir, I kind of took this as an exercise. You're asking us to embark in an exercise. It is not going to, be an overarching theme of what a governing board would look like. But for now, in this particular time, just to embark in this exercise. I just want to be clear.
And I want to join you, President Green, in suggesting that my hope is that we'll actually engage in a conversation. And while I understand Mr. Henry's concerns about us wading into areas that we don't really have a place to wade, I don't agree. I mean, I think this body is trying to trust each other enough to actually speak our truths to each other. And while, we can spend a lot of time talking about whether we should do that or how we're going to, I just think I'm hoping that we can do that. And I'm going to go first. I thought a little bit about what guiding principles for me are. And I don't want to not respond to your question, Mr. Henry, but I feel that from a standpoint of us reaching some consensus as a group, that we might be better off taking a slightly different tack rather than deciding what things we can't do. As one of our public commentators meant, let's do what we can. I don't think we're going to cast something in concrete tonight by sharing our thoughts and feelings that will impede governing bodies going forward. So I'm going to go, I thought about guiding principles for governance. And so I'm coming from a place that sees education as the foundation for our nation's democracy. And because of that, we owe our kids, we owe it to our children to empower every one of them to be informed advocates for social justice. And as board members, we owe it to our children to model informed, respectful, transparent, and civil debate that considers and furthers inclusion, racial equity, and social justice. And inclusive processes and transparency at the level of governance are key to educational success because that success relies on a healthy school culture. And through our governance, we cannot overlook and or undervalue any segment of our community and must take every measure to guard against such marginalization. Valuing community engagement that empowers the privileged and the powerful does not serve our goals of racial justice and equity. The loudest voices prevailing does not set an inclusive precedent. Kindness and self-examination matter. And desegregation is not just about numbers. It is about deepening community-wide commitment to all kids through a concerted effort at stopping institutional racism and guaranteeing the equity necessary to ensure educational excellence for every one of our students.
Thank you. What I'd like for each person who speaks to do is to give the baton to the member of someone on the other board.
No. So Deborah, you need to pass it on.
Oh, okay. Oh, goody. All right. Alina.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to open up and say that race does matter. That while someone during public comments had said that we need to open up with race, I agree, race matters. And it's because our Black and brown children have often been left behind and are often at the lowest end of the spectrum. And so that said, I think that we need to be held accountable for all of the children that are underachieving. And we can no longer, our responses have to be better. It can't be, okay, let's resolve, and then there's no action. And so my biggest thing is the accountability of our children that are constantly failing. The second thing is making sure that our school is incorporating culturally appropriate practices, materials, staff, rituals, art, music, and that our responses are also culturally appropriate. Those are my two things. Oh, and I'm passing the baton to Caroline.
I knew you'd pick me.
That's what the UTF does to us.
Yeah, right. So I agree with actually what all's been said earlier. I actually agree with Jim that the initial points were general, very standard foundational principles, as Dr. Garcia had mentioned. I do see that list of our synergies as goals and objectives for us to steer towards, and accomplishments that we can recognize as we move towards unification. But for me, your sign fell down, Deborah.
Yikes.
You know, for me, looking under the equity lens as one of our meeting norms, there was a few things that speak to me, and I have a hard time sometimes putting these in words, so I have to do some research and find things that inspire me. So there are a few statements that I found and guiding principles that I found that helped inspire me. The one main statement that inspired me was to provide opportunities for all students to thrive in a learning environment that suits their needs. One that nurtures their strengths, acknowledges their individuality, and is dedicated to their success. And so that speaks to me, to all students within our school system. And then beyond that, there were 10 guiding principles for equity in education. And we know equity doesn't necessarily mean equal. It just means providing an equal, similar opportunity for children in our district. And this actually had 3 parts. Part 1 was adopt an equity mindset. And so with each sub-bullet under these, there's kind of key action words. So under adopt an equity mindset, the first action word was to commit. And it's to understand that equity is a journey that requires collaborative commitments. So we need to commit together. The second was to collaborate, which we're doing now. Value and prioritize inclusive communication. And that touched me also because as we're communicating to our community, we have a lot of challenges in reaching everybody. So we need to make sure that we can use whatever methods we have to make sure that we're reaching every parent, every child, any caregiver in our school district. And the third under adopt an equity mindset was frame. And that was foster a culture that encourages self-reflection and new perspectives. And that's part of our, I think part of our journey through this process. Certainly I felt that through the Unification Task Force and through some of our professional development for our teachers and a lot of the parent engagement sessions that we've had, even within the work groups. Folks are experiencing self-reflection and new perspectives. And that just comes with change and leaning in and becoming part of this process. So then part 2, there's 3 parts, was drive your equity plan. So once you develop your plan, you need to nurture it, provide social and emotional support to all students and staff. You need to empathize, implement culturally responsive teaching practices. You need to build, replace institutional inequities with innovative supports. So we need to, part of the self-reflection is to examine what within our system is an institutional inequity, and then be innovative and creative in replacing those that we are aware of and maybe those that we're not quite aware of yet. And then under this bullet, the last was challenge. Ensure that all students are held to high expectations. And I've heard of that, of many successful models of diverse schools was to hold students to high standards. And then part 3 is expand your equity vision. And so you want to support, which is deliver ongoing professional learning opportunities, which I think we're doing a fine job. Listen, continually solicit feedback, which we're doing through this meeting, town halls and surveys, and then finally persist. Drive positive change through perseverance. Don't give up. And as one of our community members said, change is hard, change is uncomfortable, but that's what helps us change. So those are what spoke to me as principals.
Thank you. Would you pass the baton?
Marika, I see you next on the screen.
Well, I can't say I put as much thought into mine, Caroline, as yours. Very well researched as usual. But I was stuck a bit between the mandate to think about governance and how might we govern, to also trying to think about, what are we governing and what are the principles that we want to hold ourselves to. So In the vein of governance, I wanted to make sure that, let's see, demand excellence and not take the most expedient path to decision making. So that's really requiring, and that sort of dovetails with evidence-based decision making, and really demanding that we look at the facts and we evaluate them. But that's not to stymie acting decisively, right? So when I'm thinking about guiding principles, I want to try to think about how to measure them so that they can then sort of be turned into success criteria down the line when we start saying, well, how have we done, right? So to the extent possible, I want to start thinking about really things that we can say, okay, have we successfully achieved this as a group, right? And I think there's behavioral things like, how are we acting as a board, right? Are we having the difficult conversations we need to have as a board? But then there's also, like we're all grappling with, is, you know, the larger vision for unification. And so I look to everyone. I think that many of those things that are being said are right, spot on, and I don't think that there's one among us who would disagree. I'm looking for sort of, let's get specific. Let's really start to dial down and say, okay, this one, how do we measure this? Does this, when we say equity, what do we mean? How are we measuring equitable practices? You know, not to the point of stymieing us, and I think this conversation needs to be open-ended at the beginning, but I would like to land on a set that we can all say, okay, we can grade ourselves on our success or failure on any one of these. So that's more a comment rather than offering guiding principles per se, but.
And you passed the baton to?
Let's see. How about Ida?
Thank you, Marika. Was on mute. You're right. It's almost like us building a clone in some ways, you know? Where do you put all the intricate parts? And we certainly got work ahead of us, but as I was thinking of guiding principles just within this space and in real time, you know, something that came to mind to me that I learned growing up as a child is the golden rule, and to treat others as you would like to be treated. And so some of the principles that really come out for me specifically in the form of characteristics with the board is compassion and empathy and being a team player and having great values. But then also, as you are just building out, for me, what guiding principles in this role of governance embodies is to build trust and to value lifelong learning, because, you know, we have in the district, we have 8 years to be with families, possibly. And if we are really doing a good job, they'll be with us for the entire time. We really need to be mindful of being a good steward and to be flexible and creative and to balance, you know, all that is encompasses what we are doing for our school communities, because it really morphs itself out into our business community, our professional communities, and others. To be able to capitalize on emerging technologies and to respect diversity. I think Alina touched on that. It's very true. You know, to respect diversity and to build cultural competency. And yeah, at some point, I think it's going to be great when we just land on the model that will fit the 94965, you know, if you will. So that's kind of the guiding principles perspective for me in my thoughts. And I just need to be reminded, Dr. Satterwhite,
yes,
because I can't see everyone on my screen.
So,
oh no, Kurt.
will someone from Willow Creek step up? because she can't see
Please.
everyone.
I cannot.
Sure. I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think that this is obviously really important. I think what's great is that we're seeing so much overlap and consistency in what are the guiding principles. I think that is, I think that speaks to a lot of what we're trying to do. I tend to kind of think of guiding principles as questions quite often. In that, kind of guiding principles of, will this help students grow? So is what we're doing going to help students grow, whether that's academically, socially, emotionally, or to be better people, as we say. I also think about, is what we're focused on going to build on a culture of inclusivity and equity for the students and for the community? So, will it do as intended of building on that inclusivity and equity? And then, how do we set our teams up and our students up and our families up for success? If we're kind of trying to gun for a great goal to drive for equity and better performance of, for example, our most vulnerable students, and students that have not been performing at the level that any of us want, how do we set our teams up for success? Are we doing that in a way, in a thoughtful kind of planning approach that will do that? And then, how do we hold ourselves and others accountable to kind of test, learn, and adapt? Because I think, as everybody has said, the best laid plans are hopefully the best plan that you have today, but it's the plans are only going to get better when you see how they act in the wild. And so, I really try to think about, that accountability that we've talked about, because I think we've made at both schools, I think there's been efforts, but not necessarily outcomes. And there's some areas where there are efforts and there are outcomes. How do we hold ourselves accountable for that success or those failures? And then how do we adapt accordingly? And then, I think you hit on a really important one, and somebody else talked about transparency, but this idea of building trust through dialogue, through learning, through transparency, and through action. So those are kind of all the things some of the things, I guess, that I've been thinking about as we kind of go down this path.
And can you pass the baton?
Yeah, sure. How about Bonnie?
Thanks, Kurt. I think I may be it.
Is Josh not on?
I don't see him yet, but ideally he will be.
Lexi too.
Has he joined us?
No, but Lexi hasn't. She's
right, exactly. No, I'm sorry.
I haven't spoken either.
From the board side. Yeah, between and Lexi. So I think that this conversation, first of all, shows the richness of our community and what we can do together. All of you, and just always am impressed by the insight and the thoughtfulness and just the diversity of opinions that I think will make us strong and will make this happen. So I really appreciate that, and for me, that's a really a critical guiding principle. The reality is, with elected board, if it's 5, if it's 20, if it's whatever, we need everybody involved in this discussion, and we need to utilize not only the expertise that is here, is out in the community that we've already seen with unification work groups, but also just everything that's going on, all those people who commit so much time and care to the children in this community. We need to get them engaged. And we also really need to make sure that that support is reflective of our children, right? We need to raise up more mentors, more people of color who will provide leadership. So it can't just be this group, right? We really need to broaden that, and we need to support parents and other people in the community to develop their skills, to share their voice, so that we hear all of it. Because this is not going to be solved by people like, middle-aged white people like me. This is a much bigger, broader issue. I'm a part of it, but I'm just a part of it, and we really need more voices. So that pull and building up so that we can really have that equity frame, that we can really have that lens, is really important to me. So again, so it's sort of an inclusion, it's equity, and I will say I also, since I always feel a strong need that the governing board should be supporting staff. That staff is who carries out the day-to-day work. They're the teachers, they're the classified staff, they're the administrators, they're those people. So we need to be thinking about that as we move forward, and that role will change. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. But I think those are my guiding principles, and I thank all of you who have spoken before, because you've been eloquent, and I think all of this coming together will make us much stronger.
Thank you. We can pass the baton. Yeah.
How about if I pass to Jim and we can let Lexi finish up? All right.
Great. Hey, thanks. Appreciate it. I have two that I'd like to comment on. And first, I guess, is an example of this one, and I don't know what the intention was behind it, but I think we need to be very tolerant of different points of view as governing bodies, and understand that people think and process differently, and because they do, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not aligned with the objectives of the principles, but rather might just be trying to clarify and have a more specific approach to things. So that's a bit of my own explanation and apology if my earlier comments were misinterpreted by Ms. Turner. The second thing is, I think that the principle of accountability in our setting should apply to accountability for outcomes, and not just the process, the environment, et cetera, but also holding ourselves accountable to the outcomes, both educationally and socially, for all of our students, so that they all achieve a better educational social outcome than they would achieve with our two schools operating separately, and that we actually rely on data and facts to support that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I believe, is it Lexi?
Yeah, that's me. I'll finish up. Thank you. So I just wanted to go back to Jim's original point and kind of tie it with what Dr. Omo said at the beginning, which was, I think the guiding principles that were articulated in the first slide by Dr. Garcia set forth the overarching values that I think we all have, and that have been repeated and emphasized by all of us. And the second slide is the action that the governing body is going to take to keep as its focus, a persistent focus, the equal opportunities for all kids in this district to achieve and succeed, regardless of race, regardless of economic status, regardless of their address, regardless of any external factor, giving all kids the opportunity to reach their best selves. And I think although the governing body acts as a group, that it requires that all of the individuals engage in self-reflection about their own implicit biases and prejudices, and ask themselves, if change is, why is it hard? What about it is hard? And if that one of the reasons is coming from your own inner resistance, then be honest and accountable to yourself about what that is, and the internal resistance that you feel, And I think this is particularly important for the white people of the 94965. So, I hope everyone will look at it both from a macro standpoint of how do we achieve all of the goals that we articulate, but also from a micro, which is how do we each do our own self-analysis to figure out where we're coming from and be our best selves as we move forward and make the right decisions for our kids.
Thank you. I think the members of each board have spoken, but please allow me also to invite Dr. Garcia to also share his thoughts about guiding principles, and then we'll give you some sense of the next aspect of this conversation. Yes, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Dr. Olmo. I was working very hard to capture what everyone was saying, and my initial reaction to your question, Dr. Olmo, is a deep appreciation for what all of you just shared. Actually, I find myself to be moved by the guiding principles that all of you set forward, and I don't know that I have. It was very comprehensive. I hope as we read these back, I didn't miss anything, and I want to invite all of you, if you feel like I did, to call it out. I did a little bit of combining, a little bit of editing. As I look at these list of principles, I find that whatever it is that I would have to offer is covered in some way or another by everything that was put forward. So I don't want to take any airtime duplicating or repeating something that was already said.
So could you then, do you, by sharing your screen, want to allow us to jointly look at what you recorded?
That would be great. So this is what I captured, and you may experience it to be a little bit out of order, because as people added or expanded, I sort of combined and moved things around. So don't think this is in any particular order. It's organized as a general capture, but first of all, is this large enough for everyone to see?
Yes.
All right. So I heard social justice as a guiding principle. I heard both valuing and engaging all members of our community. I heard demanding excellence and high expectations. I heard evidence-based decision-making. And Marika, you sort of said this isn't a guiding principle, but it's in service of measurable success criteria. And I want to push you a little bit that's a great guiding principle. Measurable success criteria is important. So I wrote it down.
Thank you.
Compassion, empathy, being a team player. I kind of put in parentheses, you said team player, but I understood you to mean working for the greater good of the board, of the community, of students. So I don't know which one feels better there. Trust, dialogue, learning, transparency. This was a bit of a combo, and where you see squares is where I think people went into deeper definitions. Oh, and I clearly have a spelling error there. My apologies. A lifelong learner, opportunity to to be our best selves, flexibility, creativity, respecting and valuing diversity of opinion, and being tolerant of different points of view. Or and I think Jim, in all fairness, I might have heard you say clearly but didn't get on the page, style, or learning style. I had equity as a bullet, and I decided that given all of the different conversations around equity, it merited its own slide. So here's just the equity slide with all of these points underneath it. Providing opportunities for all students to thrive in a learning environment that meets their needs, acknowledges their strengths and individuality. And Caroline, I might have missed a word there. Mindset. Having an equity mindset, having a collaborative commitment, committing to collaboration, having inclusive communication, being open to new perspectives, and then nurturing the equity plan around social emotional learning, around empathy, finding innovative supports and to replace institutional inequities, having a
You freeze.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
We lost you, Dr. Garcia.
There's a tendency to like do this kind of work and put a fork in it and then not come back to it. And I think that that's a really important idea.
Dr. Garcia, pardon me. When you said innovative supports replace institutional inequities, you went out. So could you start from that point?
Yeah. Having an expansive equity vision, engaging in professional learning, engaging in feedback, and persisting towards that vision. What I was saying was that I think often when we do this kind of work, we have a tendency to put a fork in a definition or a word and then not really reflect back on it or bring it back up for further consideration or discussion. And I think the persistence of having an
He'll thaw out in a minute.
We lost you again.
Self-reflection of our own bias, prejudice, and resistance. Having a commitment to
Dr. Garcia, you're going in and out.
As part of that.
Pardon me, you're going in and out, Dr. Garcia. We missed the last minute of what you said.
Well, let me try
you can start this slide. We didn't hear anything about the slide that's currently up.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening. I'm at home, so theoretically my connection should be better.
Not a problem. Keep going. You're very clear when we hear you.
Okay. Self-reflection, having a commitment to deep self-reflection, particularly our biases, prejudices, and anything that we feel resistant to as both an individual and a community. That we have a commitment to anti-racism, that race matters, that race is central to the discussions that we have as a guiding principle, that we have academic and social accountability for all of our kids, and that we test and learn and adapt as part of being accountable, and that we're also accountable to the outcomes for both academic and social outcomes for all students. I think that's really important as well. We often get very accountable to processes, but being accountable to outcomes is really important. That we have a culturally appropriate, competent staff, curriculum, that we're student centered, that we're focused on growth, academic, social, emotional learning growth, the growth of our students' humanity. That we build a culture of inclusivity and equity in students and community, that we support success. We support the success of our teams, of our students, and of our staff. and that we have a commitment to developing diverse leadership. And so if anybody feels like I missed what they said, please let me know. I did my best to capture what you all were saying, and did a very tiny first round of synthesis where I thought I saw some commonalities. But what I'd like us to invite us to do is build, if there's a few things that seem redundant, to call them out and combine them. And then I do feel like, in some senses, the squares on all of these are sort of details for larger principles. And so if we look at just the circles, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Pardon me, Dr. Garcia, would you make that slide larger?
Yeah.
Thank you.
If we look at just the circles, we have about 22 guiding principles. If we add the squares, which I think are finer grained details, then it's more. But does anybody feel like I missed what they said, or don't see it captured or reflected here?
Nope.
I
wonder if we could combine compassion and empathy.
And then is the value / engage all members of our community captured by the respect and value diversity of opinions and different points of view and styles?
I think the style question is also one of honoring the way different members process details and honoring also the different focuses that people bring by virtue of maybe their careers or their experiences, that kind of thing.
And I will say my point, I think, is captured more in the expanding leadership, which I think may be on the third slide.
Yeah, that is.
So, yeah. So as long as that remains, I'm okay with combining.
Okay.
I think you've done a good job summarizing. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jim.
I was just commenting. I thought he did a good job of summarizing all the comments made. Thank you.
Would it be well, I'm sure that there's an extension to this activity, but in terms of turning these into sort of actionable sentences that have sort of boundaries to them, is that the job of sort of, or might we each go and pick a few and then kind of come back with a sort of some proposal to develop, action-oriented principles that may combine or not combine several of these, so that we can then kind of, if our goal, it'd be nice to have a sort of a concise list that has some detail. And I think we could have them in different types of categories. It doesn't all have to be all encompassing, but I'd love to see each of these kind of combined and massaged and created, and turned into something that we can all kind of coalesce around and feel like that, we can refer to no more than 10, let's say, if that could be a goal, to kind of synthesize them down to that.
I like that idea. Well, we have 13 board members if everyone's present. Do you have any more inspiration on your idea, Marika, of how to do that?
Well, maybe we just start with the ones that, maybe one or two that we each put forward. And if we find areas, that cross the board across many of the other things that people said, then we can incorporate them. But that if they kind of are adjacent or they work well, but maybe we start with the ones that we felt we put forward and then come up with, what we think would be a more mature expression of it.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear a little bit more about, I thought I heard you going in the direction of like kind of creating actionable sentences or statements.
Yeah.
Can you give us all maybe a little bit of a finer grained example of what that might be or look like?
Well, I'd say if you go to the next slide, the closest that might resemble that is provide opportunities. There's a verb, an action-oriented verb, and these are the things, the tools, and maybe we drill down on maybe some sub-bullets of what we think those are, but, a sentence like that, a bullet that kind of expresses the totality of that thought. That's all I'm going for.
Got it. Thank you.
Not to give us more work, but you could also task the UTF with combining and creating sentences, having heard everyone's input. And then we could come back with sentences that create action oriented and goal oriented statements that are condensed.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. We happen to have a committee tasked with just that.
I mean, I'm happy to spread the wealth and have everybody do it individually, but just an idea.
Yeah, I'm all for that.
Just one caveat. If each individual could send to, for now, Carol, what you stated in actionable form.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you. Send it to Dr. Garcia, not to me.
Okay, thank you.
It'll get lost if you send it to me.
I totally agree. But that sounds, if everybody would send to Dr. Garcia an actionable statement or statements around the things that you presented, then the task force can bring back an integrated set of guiding principles.
And that's
probably under some themes, or headers,
So I'd like to call for a fist of 5 on that idea. So just to restate, you'll all send me your statements as you have them. The UTF will do some organizing and statement generation, and then we will bring back a set of, and I appreciated, Marika, I think you said a set of no more than 10 guiding principles, and I think I agree that's a good number.
So can we fist of 5, please? I see all 5s.
Excellent.
1 4.
2 4s.
2 4. Sorry about that.
I mean, I guess. I don't
We aren't on the UTF.
We're not leading.
Yeah, we're being very specific about our responsibilities.
Oh, that's sneaky.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for participating and for being so thoughtful and inspiring in sharing your ideas.
Indeed. I'm really energized by this list and excited to take it back to the UTF and do some refining. Quickly, just wanted to ground ourselves in some of the work that we had done about adding board seats and why we had sort of moved away from that option and towards a couple options that were proposed that we'd like to spend really the rest of the time that we have tonight on discussing and fleshing details out on. And those are, there were 2 sort of main options. One that the UTF had brought forward, and then another that came up in our, actually, I think in our second joint study session. It was an early offering. And those two options, and please don't feel confined if you have a third and a fifth option, like we want the discussion around it. But we just wanted to ground ourselves in where we'd been to kick the discussion off. One option was an advisory board with 2 members at the dais. We had talked about maybe having a rotating board based on expertise, experience, unification work group participation. Those do have to be non-voting board members per the Ed Code and California Constitution. And then we had talked about perhaps having a combination of advisory committees and a transition committee. And whether or not those were superintendent committees or ad hoc committees was a place we had left the conversation. And so in order to have a deeper discussion about what some of the details of those options or other options that you put forward might look like, we thought it would be important to kind of get down into the weeds a little bit and start to answer some of these questions, right? How are people selected in either option? How long do people serve on either option? In what ways do members have to communicate with the board and the superintendent in either option? How do members communicate with the public in either option? And I just wanted to put a quick note of clarification around superintendent committees. Traditionally, those are committees that are where the superintendent invites folks to participate, and then the work of that committee is shared in a superintendent update when I update the board. But there's no like Ed Code or law or Brown Act behind this, and so an option, if that is a route that we build consensus around, could be that committee is given a standing presentation at regular board meetings. So that's option. It wouldn't always have to be the superintendent saying, "Oh, well, the committee met and we talked about this." Like, we could actually have a standing presentation from a committee like this, so that there's always a space at the board meeting for the committee to make a presentation. A transition committee, we would want to keep it ad hoc, probably, but perhaps not. We could pass a resolution. The only difference there is that it would need to be agendized. And for the sake of transparency and public access, maybe that's something that we want. But a transition committee with 2 board members plus advisory board members could also give a report at regular board meetings. When we do committee reports are standing agenda items at board meetings. And so if we did a formal board committee like this, that would be another way that those options would have to communicate. But we really want to turn it over to all of you and spend the rest of our time tonight having a discussion about what some details of those options might be, or other options that we have yet to consider.
And just from a process point, it would be really helpful, and we actively invite each member of both boards to share your thinking about any aspect of this governance questions in terms of the structure of that, the governance process and how it works. And I'd like to actually start, it seems to me that to transition into this, that the chairs of both boards may just have some reflections you want to share, and then we'll do a round robin passing the baton.
Thank you, Dr. Omawale. Just in thinking about the whole aspect of what it looks like, I really appreciate the fact that it's a discussion that's being held, because when we talk about setting a precedent for the local community and for the nation at large, I really don't know. I've not heard of before, and maybe Dr. Sadawire or Garcia, you can let me know, that there ever has been an elected board that's seated, that is invited, like an advisory component to its board. I think it's innovative. If it hasn't happened, I hope it hasn't, because we might just very well be the first one to do it. But I think it lends itself to other voices as well, and it brings a perspective that can shape the process in terms of what governing looks like within a school district. So those are my thoughts.
And Kurt, any initial thoughts? Or
yeah. I mean, I think, I think definitely, it's important for us to expand the engagement with other community members, given kind of all the knowledge that people have. I think, and that's why I've been kind of thinking about this kind of, short, mid, and long. In the short term, we should think about how does transitional governance work through the process of unification, right? When we've got two boards, how do we make sure that we're doing this in a really well-aligned way? I think that these study sessions are one example. I think the UTF is another really good example. Like, how do we in the short term demonstrate more, open, inclusive governance, and bring people in? And then from a longer term standpoint, I think then we look and we say, what are those areas that we think are really important to have deep engagement early on? Because that's a big part of us getting to unification. And then what things are not going to be needed longer term? I think there will be some areas that, for example, community engagement, I think that's going to be going on forever, right? You can always work on that and improve on that, et cetera. But I'm trying to think of other, maybe there's, specific aspects of, maybe we're doing program integration. Maybe we have committees on program integration. So how are we going to integrate music and art into these things? These may be shorter term things that we build up, solve that problem, and then they move away. So I'd love for us to think about this in kind of those three phases of what does governance look like in the short term when we've got the two boards? How do we optimize that? How do we then set up governance that helps us solve short-term problems, and then also have it for those kind of big long-term opportunities that we'll always want to be, grappling with solving for from a, in a broader way.
Thank you. Dr. Garcia, would you back up one slide with the examples of the issues? There may be other issues that people want to share their thinking about, but these are prompters for you to weigh in on. And I think Dr. Garcia said it's really okay, and you're invited to maybe get in the weeds a little bit in terms of trying to talk through some of this and come into some shared understanding of what the governance process might look like going forward. But let me then invite whoever would like to begin the conversation, and then I'll invite you to pass the baton to someone until we get through everyone on the two boards. Who'd like to begin?
This is Jim. I'd be happy to comment.
Thank you.
Sure. So is it great framing of the topic here, and thanks for the comments from the board chairs. I guess one of the frameworks I'm thinking of for advisory committees is kind of pre-consummation, if you will, of the combined / unified school or schools, the operations of it, and then subsequent needs for additional advisory committees, as some commenters have already pointed out, that those needs may be transitional or transitory and could have new needs in the future. But I really am supportive of the idea of the ad hoc transition committee for the unified board going forward. So at the time and going forward for a period of time, just because there'll be so many issues, and it seems like a formal report out in the public board meetings would be useful, and perhaps the 5-member board would benefit from the additional support in that regard. I think the advisory committees around the already established elements of unification. We've talked about some of budget, curriculum, facilities, community engagement, equity, etc. It might be a great extension of these joint study sessions of both boards to involve specific community members who really have expertise in those areas to help carry on the next steps to achieve the ultimate unification. So I'm not sure if we're talking about advisory committees being in a pre or post unification environment, but I'd really encourage us thinking about the work that has to be done now and going ahead and starting some of these advisory committees with the board's input on, do we have the right members and expertise on those?
Thank you for sharing. Would you pass the baton?
I'd love to pass the baton, please, to Deborah Turner.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to take this opportunity to apologize to you for not honoring and acknowledging your process. And
no need. I process in a strange way, but thank you.
Yeah, I'm getting it. Had you stayed on the Unification Task Force longer, I probably would have had you figured out by now, but not figured out. But anyway.
We'll have a chance.
Yeah. I think, to me, a big part of this governance discussion is really about giving the public an opportunity, the parents, the teachers, to really see us working together and trust that we really do care about all the kids in the district, and that the values, the guiding principles that we are developing, and the process, the governance process, is reassuring to them. And so for that reason, I think that the transition committee, as I think Jim said, is really key. Mm-hmm. Because I think it will, as I imagine it functioning, it will to some degree take over for the Unification Task Force, because I see this sort of happening. I'm looking at this as unification has been agreed to, and we're moving forward. And so the transition committee seems to me an essential body that will, I think Jeff might have made a study session about, when companies merge, they have these, transitional committees or whatever you call them. And that's how I see this group functioning, both as a place where parents and teachers can address their issues, a group that will see if we're meeting our timeframes, a group that will see, just where the problems are and give voice to those problems, and particularly community members, parents, teachers who have particular issues. And I think that such a group would, for a period of time, deserve a seat on the dais. And as I have experienced with the Unification Task Force, trust comes out of our working together. I will pass the baton to Kurt, because I can see him on my little screen here. So.
I think Kurt already went, but.
He did? Oh my gosh. Okay, Alina, thank you.
I don't know, Kurt, did you have something to add, or no?
I was just going to say what you said, Alina, that I had a chance to speak at the beginning, so go for it.
Okay. Well, I'd like to just say that, yes, I would definitely be for having these transition committees, the advisory board, transition committees, because it would definitely add more visibility, more understanding of the issues. We could look at best practices. It would ultimately what Deborah was saying about building trust, deeper and stronger building of trust between our board and amongst our community. Yes, those are my reasons. And I would like to pass it to Ida.
Yeah, Ida spoke as well.
Oh, that's right.
But thank you so much, sis. I think Bonnie's on.
Yes, Bonnie. Bonnie, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
I need to unmute. Sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to clarify a couple of things. And one is, if it is a board committee, officially a board committee under the, can we not invite others to participate in that? Or is that has to be a superintendent committee?
You kind of broke up, Bonnie.
Okay, if it's a board committee, can we invite other members and have it be under the Brown Act, or does that have to be a superintendent committee?
I will commit to doing a little bit of research on this. My understanding is that any ad hoc committee can invite guests, right? And so while it might be a little bit unusual to invite the same guests every time, I don't believe it's a violation of the Brown Act, but I will definitely check.
Okay, thank you. So I definitely think a transition committee would be great, and I'm up for any ideas. Being at the dais makes sense to me. Having that richness of discussion seems really valuable. And I do think that there are a lot of, going back to the early work groups, things like the transportation group would be great to get them engaged. I don't think that necessarily has to stay on forever, as we discussed, but having their feedback, getting their engagement, their new ideas would be super helpful. I mean, there are so many sort of, to my mind, kind of focused things that we need to do that I would love to have this opportunity to have more people from the community share. We already have a superintendent committee on communications, but really working on letting the community know about this, getting people's engagement, that kind of thing seems to me really critical. And then and things like parent engagement. We, working with Willow Creek has, done tremendous work on that. And how do we really expand and make sure, again, that all the parents in the district are represented and people feel really comfortable about doing that. So let's see. So I think we can identify some short-term things that people can commit to, where they're not saying, oh my God, I'm going to have to go to a meeting every once a month for, 13 years. That it's just like, we're going to make this decision and get it done. And then, but through that process, we can also identify leadership that will want to stay on and will want to be engaged in this continuing process. And I very much like the idea of the committees being able to make presentations at the board meeting rather than having that all fall on you, Dr. Garcia. I think that increases their engagement and involvement and is helpful for all of us to hear, and again, gives more leadership opportunities. I think those are, sort of my primary things, but also I guess I really want us to think about these committees as being beyond both boards. Right? That I think we need more participation than just our boards in this effort. So while the transition committee may well make sense for that to be, a combination of boards, I would like us to be looking at a much broader pool of folks for this effort.
And you would pass the baton to?
I will pass the baton to, how about Lexi?
Oh, thanks, Bonnie. I actually was going to raise my hand. I think that I'd like to ask us to maybe think of specifics. And I had two proposals as far as how our members selected. So one thing, we have 6 people on the UTF, and that seems like a good group, that size group that's able to communicate. I think it should be like enough people that you have good representation, but not too big of a group that it doesn't communicate effectively in meetings. So I'm thinking maybe like a 6 to 10 or something like that. The other thing I was wanting to propose is that I think that the transition committee should focus roles, and not roles, but like the selection of members on what I would call like nuts and bolts, like a budget member, somebody that could assist with working through budget issues, a union person. And I totally agree with Bonnie that it wouldn't be people drawn necessarily from either boards, but maybe like the union rep. And then like for community engagement, you could have a parent representative from both schools, a member of the community services district, maybe a member of the Sausalito City Council, just drawing like, and then hopefully the people that are serving on the transition committee could essentially form a liaison to the groups that they're communicating with, and then bring that feedback back to the group. So yeah, that's how I would like to see the model for how people get selected for the transitional committee. I don't really understand all the Brown Act restrictions and stuff, but I also think that what Bonnie said is really important, that if you want to have people volunteer, in addition to all the other responsibilities that people have, you have to give them like discrete, meetings, guarantee them that they're not going to be serving, for the rest of their lives, but, maybe like maybe it's a year, maybe it's a year starting now, and maybe it's a year starting now, and then some period after the actual unification. And I think that it's really important to highlight something that Dr. Omawale's told us in the UTF meetings, which is the healing period for this community is not just going to be up until unification, it's going to be ongoing. It's a process. And so that might be a function that the transition committee can also serve, is to help us all communicate effectively and air our differences of opinion.
And you passed the baton too?
Oh, I passed the baton. I have the same problem. I can't see everyone on my screen.
I think I'm the last one.
Okay, I passed to Caroline.
Yeah. So I agree with everything that's been said so far. I do like the idea of the transition committee, and that it's comprised of a nice broad spectrum of kind of hubs of certain community voices, whether it's city council, the community services district, member of each board. From 7 years on the board and learning about how committees work with the Brown Act, ad hoc committees, as my understanding is, it can only be comprised of 2 board members. As soon as you add anybody else, it's subject to the Brown Act. And so you could still have it as an ad hoc committee, which essentially means that it has a time limit to its existence, or you could just make it a standing committee to the board, or you can make it a superintendent's committee. But I do appreciate that if it's a standing committee to the board, and being subject to Brown Act might be beneficial, in that the meetings will be public and transparent. But at the same time, through transition, you might need a committee that's more nimble and can meet, without a whole lot of fanfare. But frankly, a standing committee only needs 24-hour notice, so it's not a significant impediment to make them transparent and public. And I was thinking too, I do like the idea of maintaining the work groups and inviting whoever may want to add to that membership through time to continue those forward, and maybe even consider and I don't want this committee to get too big on the transition committee, but a member of each work group participating on the transition committee.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be some participate at some point in time and not other times. So budget may be up front, facilities may be up front, maybe all of them up front, but then some of them may kind of wane over time and just participate when that topic comes up on the agenda. But that way, this transition committee serves as the hub of communication between the board, both boards and the work groups, and also their individual kind of community sectors. And I do agree with Jim that getting this transition committee going sooner than later is probably a really good idea. And I do agree that it would essentially take over for the UTF. And maybe there's a transition meeting where we transfer knowledge and information or two in the beginning. And I do think, though, that it should come out of the agreement of unification, the final decision on unification.
Thank you.
What else?
Good.
And then as far as like ideas of pre-combining committee, I think that this transition committee would serve as kind of the pre-combining, during combination, post-combination. And then maybe once this transition committee has served its purpose, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, it could then morph into more of an advisory board where it's just got a more permanent place in its interaction with the governing board. So those are my thoughts. And then I haven't heard anybody talk about the importance of having someone at the dais versus just having standing reports to the board as part of our agenda. And then Ida, you asked whether it's been done before. And I think I mentioned when I was the liaison to the Willow Creek board as part of my role on the district board, Willow Creek would invite me to sit at the table. And so I could communicate on all the topics that came forward rather than just a 3-minute or a short commentary at certain points in time. And it did provide more direct and continuous and robust dialogue on decision making. But that said, it's really kind of a matter of how we envision this committee interacting with the board and needing that level of dialogue on every agenda item and sitting at the dais for our sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 hour meetings. We wouldn't let you escape. Or if it's a standing report is sufficient, and that they could comment any other topics on the agenda just like everybody else. So I don't know what the group's feeling is on those interaction options.
Yeah, I may not have been clear. I meant on a publicly elected board. So, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great that you've had that experience. And I think it was either Bonnie or Deborah who did talk about having a seat at the diocese being important.
Yeah, and we've invited Tarina as a guest to our board.
Well, many boards have student board members who don't have voting capabilities, but they're at every board meeting and they have a seat at the table. So, and can discuss, although their vote doesn't sway.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that.
Can I ask a question sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Caroline, since you brought it up, can you or somebody else give like an opinion about what the most nimble kind of committee as far as communication and presentation would be? Because I don't understand all the different distinctions between the committees, different kinds of committees.
I think the ad hoc 2-member board committee is probably the most nimble because you can meet quickly, both because of the size of the committee and that you don't need Brown Act and minutes and so forth from those meetings. But if we're looking at having a larger committee, I think your 2 options are standing committee to the board or an expanded ad hoc, both of which would be subject to the Brown Act, or a superintendent's committee who the superintendent selects, who are not subject to the Brown Act. But it's not considered a standing committee of the board. They're 2 distinct models.
And can I just say one of the things about the Brown Act is not just that we have to notice and obviously all the meetings are public, but we cannot, for example, share communications. Any communications would have to be public. So like we can't email, if, for example, on the board now, I can't talk to 2 other people about issues prior to a board meeting. That would be or I cannot talk to Deborah and then Deborah talks to Caroline. That would be a serial meeting. So it makes it important that that's my issue and sort of those sort of discussions in terms of nimbleness. I can't share a communication again with the members of the board. It would have to be a public. Here's this, like we can't just email each other and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So that's one of the issues in terms of being nimble.
Yeah, that's a great point. And people who are on these committees need to fully understand that you can't have little side discussions with a quorum or serial meetings. But a superintendent's committee isn't subject to that same restriction.
Right. And Willow Creek is subject to the Brown Act. Your board now is subject to the Brown Act. So just to be clear that's
right. I'm just saying, if you add community members that may not have operated under a Brown Act situation, it's there's a learning curve. There would need to be some training.
Do you have public task force meetings, or no?
For UTF?
Well, no, just like the UTF, but the transition task force or something like that.
Well, the UTF is comprised of our committee and your committee, which are only your board members, and they're both ad hoc committees. So they're not subject to the Brown Act because they're only less than a quorum of the board members, and then we're acting collectively. We're meeting together. Yeah, not acting collectively, meeting together with in our capacity as ad hoc committee members.
Did every one of the board members get an opportunity to?
No, Marika.
I'm sorry, please.
Yeah,
No,
I pass it to Marika.
No, I mean, I'm happy that I think we're all sort of on the same page of the need for both a transition committee and some form of ad hoc committee structure where, we can sort of hear from groups that are working certain subjects. So I'm really pleased with that. I think the only thing that sort of I want to impress is this sense, at least from the Willow Creek perspective, the parents have been a critical piece of our governance, or let's say, I don't want to call them tool, but like an essential ingredient of our ability to govern. And I think that is as well as the teachers. And so whatever we can do to also understand parents on a different plane than the community. So when we started talking about really looking at who should be involved, I want to make sure that there is a special place for parents to come together who are sort of all uniquely and collectively invested in the same thing. I believe that is a communication that needs to really start gelling in a way that we have failed to do in the past, right? So that's just really more a sort of how do we create a governing structure that is not just inclusive of or reports out to, but dependent upon the voice of parents.
Are there any other board members who would like to share additional thinking?
I think, can't remember, I think it was Lexi who talked about the size of the unification task force as being manageable, which was 6. And as I count the number of, people and organizations who we're thinking of in this transition committee, it becomes unwieldy, if only on a scheduling basis, I mean, how hard it is to schedule. So I just wonder if it's worth a little more thought as to how to meaningfully engage the groups, and at the same time have this transition committee do what it needs to do, which I think I'm hearing is mostly be a hub for communication. I mean, about unification and where it's going. I know I'm all for it, but I do hope we can flush out what this group is really going to do. Because I think like I see it as a place where parents can reach out and know that their concerns about unification, how it's going, how it isn't going, will be heard in a way that they can actually talk, to members of the committee. I don't know. I'd like us to talk about it more because it's kind of getting fuzzy in my head.
Well, then do we want maybe a smaller, more nimble transition committee, but a larger, more inclusive advisory committee that work in parallel? Just an idea.
I mean, I think one of the roles, just to answer Deborah's question, is that it has to, in addition to being a communication hub, I think it should be a committee that deals with problems as they come up, right? Like if there's going to be a budget problem, for example, then we have to have a budget person, maybe one of the people from the FIT group, to help work through that, to solve it, or whatever whatever problems crop up as we go forward, that would be the committee that helps solve the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And takes it to the boards, right? And
right.
That's what I mean. Not solve the problems, but be able to communicate to the boards about
the recommendation, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Did you have a comment?
My question was around, thinking about kind of, I think some of this comes out as a matter of timing, right? So if, for example, we're in the, we're in unification now, right? So we're already in it. And so as we're going through the deeper details of building out the plan, I think we're going to have the budget committee is going to be a pretty tight group that's got to get a lot of work done. So in the short term, I think you're going to have more action-driven committees that need specialization. And then I think over time you have more of kind of an advisory committee that is communicating out and gathering feedback and then coming up with new problems to solve. So I think I'm having a tough time thinking about, are we talking about how we get to kind of closure on a unification plan? There's going to be committees and engagement there. And then once we have a plan, the execution of the plan, we'll have a different structure, because at that point we'll have, one school board, and then you'll have committees. So trying to think through, we'll have more, more engagement and flexibility in the early part than in the latter part.
Let me ask members of the Unification Task Force and/or Dr. Garcia, with regards to advisory committee, did you envision a single committee with different representation there, or multiple work groups? You might, or is it committees advisory or committee advisory, as you were envisioning?
In my mind, the first, and everyone in the UTF, correct me if you have a different idea, but the UTF, the advisory committee, was going to be an ongoing body that would be a collection of kind of what we were saying about the transition committee, but maybe it'd be members of the work groups, representatives from the community, parents, teachers. So it'd be a larger group that maybe will not meet as often or as often as they want, but it would be advisory to the board on an ongoing basis. So I saw that as being a larger, more comprehensive, more fairly inclusive advisory board or advisory committee to the board. Other UTF members, was that your recollection of what we talked about?
Yes.
It is.
I thought the advisory board, which was in one of the slides, was going to be 1 to 2 members who sat at the dais and maybe they would rotate depending on what was going on, depending on their unification, or their experience, expertise, etc. And then the advisory committee and or the transition committee, or I'm just looking at the slides, the advisory committees are larger groups, and the and ongoing, I don't know what nature they are. And then the transition committee, something we really didn't talk that much about, but I advocate for it. One, as you said, Caroline, it comes out of unification, i.e. it doesn't come into being until unification is agreed upon. The task force continues to function until that happens. I don't know, I'm making it up, but that's my sense of how we were talking.
Well, my recollection was the advisory committee would be formed the way I described, and then there would be 2 members of that committee that would be nominated from that committee that would then go sit at the board.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Thank you.
Separate groups. It was.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of an unstable internet connection. That's why I keep turning my video off, because it works better if the video is not running simultaneously with the audio. But I think there's, I think it's a useful framework to think about the shorter term action, mission driven committees, if you will, to work out like sort of specific issues germane to unification, and a longer term transition committee. And I want to offer the idea that we could start the transition committee sooner rather than later. These are all be committees that are formed by either resolutions or actions of the Board of Trustees of the Sausalito Marin City School District. And so I think that if there's a consensus amongst the board members that it will help us get to unification in the most efficient fashion, then we could consider maybe we could consider forming that committee sooner rather than later.
Would that committee though be the larger committee that the task force had originally envisioned, or would it be the smaller, more nimble task force or transition task force?
I think that we would need a smaller, more nimble transition task force in the short term, and that would set up the longer term committee.
So I guess I will say that my fantasy had been that the UTF members would be continuing, since you guys have been working so hard and have been thinking about these issues, have been communicating, understand each other's styles, all that kind of stuff, and that you would be able to sort of focus that effort, and that we would be having those shorter term committees that are dealing with various issues, and then you could come back with, I get it that you won't be able to continue forever so much as I would love it, but that then we could really sort of come up with this idea for the larger advisory committee, because there are different things that have been floated here. I think they're really interesting. I have to get my head around having what kind of configuration would make sense, but I just feel like for the short term, just as we've sort of asked you to go back and say, can you come up with these guiding principles? I would really love it if you continued on with that. And because I will say the other thing that I am concerned about is, again, having a diverse group of members on the advisory body. I'm just really worried that we will, depending on how it gets configured, I just want to make sure that we reflect the students and the parents on this advisory board.
So I just, as a process point, I just want to note that that's, I think, the second or third time that I've heard the configuration question. And we have 45 minutes left in this meeting. And maybe we can lean into that configuration conversation a little bit right now.
So let's, yes. And so can you state or defer to a committee member what just restate the original options, because there's still a little unclarity about the relationship, what constitutes the advisory committee and what its relationship would be to a transition committee vis-a-vis the continuation of the work groups.
Sure. I think, what we're really asking to have happen in the next, 14 days or so is for the work groups to reconvene in the areas that they have chosen, and to give us some pretty specific feedback on some of the plan options that we have outlined, right? And that there could be a process by which those work group members form members of either one of these two options, right? That they are rotating members of an advisory board, or they are one idea that I heard was one member of each unification group become part of the transition committee. And I think the hybrid of what I'm hearing is, if we have these short-term actionable committees, like we already have these folks organized in unification work groups. The sort of very easy step is to make them a superintendent committee, and then figure out if we want to give them a standing presentation space at board meetings, right? And it's not to say that the membership of those superintendent committees would be limited to unification work group members. That would just be sort of the seed or the start of those committees. I think that in the spirit of inclusivity and transparency, we have to open them beyond the unification work groups. But I also think, and I just have to say, I think Deborah, you mentioned it, and Lexi, you mentioned it. I do think that we should have finite numbers for these committees. They need to be nimble. Scheduling even 5 people's schedules, as you all know, is not as easy as it might seem. And so, I would shy away from having, really large committees, because I'd be worried about scheduling and actually getting any work done. And so I think building consensus around one of these forms and committee members and how they get appointed might be a really good use of the time that we have remaining.
Good.
Dr. Garcia, permit me to ask you to say just a bit more about, it's clear now where you see the work group activity happening and how. Say just a little more then about the connection or the distinction between the advisory committee and the transition committee as options.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we're, again, talking short-term and long-term.
Right.
Right. I think we're talking about the advisory committee being something that is a long-term thing, right? That where we really can draw upon the expertise of our community on an ongoing basis. Whereas a transition committee would be really dedicated to the transition between two separate schools to a unified school.
Thank you.
And
then
can I,
yeah, please, yes, Bonnie.
I'm just thinking about, so I guess what I'm thinking is the advisory committee in the long run, it isn't that they're just two members, it's that there's an advisory committee and they will choose two members to sit at the dais, right? And I guess one thing what I would love to see is some sort of application process for being on the advisory committee. And so there can be a thoughtful, like, do we have the right people at the table? Do we have enough diversity? Do we really have parent representation? Do we really have, all those things, and sort of come up with something. So because for me, seems like a reasonable kind of thing, particularly if we're saying we can't have 395 people on this committee. So that would be my suggestion, is that we have this broad range of working groups and then invite people to apply to be on an advisory committee.
From the working,
and then defer to UTF to make those choices, but or something. We come up with some process for making those choices, but that we can. That's, to my mind, that seems like the best way to ensure a diverse group of folks.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. You earlier, just a moment ago, offered an area of focus for the rest of our conversation. Would you restate that, please?
Let me unmute myself first. That would help. I think that I want to invite us. I mean, I feel like I heard some degree of consensus around an ad hoc transition committee, and that being sort of a short-term action. So I think maybe one thing that we could do would be to call for a fist of 5 on that idea and see if the consensus I think I heard actually exists. And then we could answer some of these questions about that transition committee. How are the members selected? How long do they serve? To Bonnie's point, is there an application process?
Okay.
Well, Bonnie's point was application process to the advisory committee, not to the transition committee. And I think to vote on an ad hoc transition committee, I would need more information to know what's the size of it. And
I thought that the UTF it is kind of the transition committee. That's what I was trying to like. So we're gonna have a period of time in which we're gonna need, I think, a body like the UTF. And if the teams on the UTF if certain people are like, I've hit my limit, need to swap some energy out maybe. But in the short term, I think we're going to need that cohesive team. And then I think, what we've talked about is we then need a budget committee, a kind of staffing union committee, a community engagement committee, a curriculum committee, facilities, transportation. And those should be kind of like, I would think, branching out of UTF, and they can be, where it makes sense to have board members involved or not. They could be ad hoc committees set by either board if we've got issues with that, or we can, just have them start building up like that. It seems, I think the idea of building a new transition committee seems was a little confusing to me.
Thanks, Kurt. I appreciate that. I think that to a certain extent, and I appreciate and agree that the folks that have been engaged in the UTF committee are natural choices to stay on. It's a shift of mission, however, and so I think that's all that I'm really trying to bring up is, the UTF was designed to make a recommendation, and I feel like we are getting close. We're not quite there yet, but I feel like we're getting close. The transition committee is, and I guess, Caroline, the point that you raised maybe is resonating with me a little bit more strongly now about once we've made the decision around unification, then the transition committee comes in.
Right.
But there's, I don't think the UTF is as currently configured. Its mission isn't what the mission of the transition committee would be yet. I think we're very close. I just don't think we're quite there. And I think we would actually need a new action by both boards to shift the mission.
We would just need to form new ad hoc committees and end the unification task force and form a new ad hoc committee. That would be the transition committee.
That's what I'm saying, exactly.
And then if we meet with work groups, could be the hub of transfer of information and pushing out and pulling in information from the work groups up to the boards or joint board meetings or reports out and that kind of thing.
And so would the transition committee then be the team that's in charge of coming up with the final plan with budget and staffing and all of that both boards approve?
I think it would be helping work through it, but not deciding on it. We can't do that as an ad hoc committee.
Yeah, no, I know, not deciding, but that would be their job. So the UTF was set to kind of get to kind of
a recommendation,
strokes of what unification could look like at a high level. The transition committee then is the one that's going to do the more detailed work, so that then we've got bigger plans that we could then bring to a vote around
the implementation
and all of that stuff.
I think
point though, that do those trigger in? I mean, I guess that's a question in terms of timing. At what point do we dissolve as a board and that becomes then a transition committee, or are those things still going on and we have this sort of transitionary body that's receiving input from both boards, and then it sort of, that's how it carries on?
Yeah, I clearly this is the exact right discussion to be having right now, so that there's clarity. I think what's important is that the UTF makes a recommendation. Right. That's what we're charged to do. We're charged to come up with a plan and make a recommendation around a plan. I think once the UTF, and I do think we're close. Once the UTF does that, then both boards at separate meetings, right, not at a joint study session, but at separate agendized meetings, both boards would need to take an action, right? Let's just positively assume that both boards say, okay, the action that we're going to take is we're going to commit to this plan. At that point, then the UTF committee has met its charge. The UTF has met its charge. It sort of can end with the recommendation of a plan, and then maybe part of a simultaneous ratification of a plan is the creation of an ad hoc transition committee that then works out the details of said plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just want to say though that I have all respect and love for the UTF committee, but I think that we need to bring in a new I think there are going to be some people who have reached the limit. 2, I think we need to bring in some specific expertise, like budget issues or union issues, things that as we've been going through, we just need more specific information on.
But if I was hearing that correctly, and maybe you can circle back. So the UTF was formed to make recommendations, goes back to both boards to make a discussion. After that, the UTF's role could end. So are you saying, Lexi, that to have that expertise come in would be before the recommendation happens, after the recommendation? Because what I'm hearing Dr. Garcia say is that after the UTF ends, then you transition into what looks like a transitional committee or advisory committee, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that. I think the UTF ends, and then maybe some members of the UTF go on to the new committee, but it has to, like, additional people need to be added, and some people are going to drop off.
I see. And so that's when the professionals come in the specific areas.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're not recommending a larger body, Lexi, in terms of, you're saying that the size of the committee is about right, or is this at the point where you kind of expand that group?
I think I agree. I think Caroline said this earlier. I envisioned it getting bigger because I don't think 6 is a big enough group to have representation that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think
the problem is that bigger than 6 and you trip.
Right. Oh, right.
Can I ask so let's see, there's some things that can't be done until both boards agree to unify. I mean, and not just under the umbrella of our spirit is towards unification, but, you know, we have committed to unification, and therefore these kind of things can be done. And I'm not clear in everyone's discussion when that happens. So I'd love to have people address that, because, you know, until the boards have made that official commitment decision, there are things that simply can't be undertaken in terms of negotiations with the union, teacher staffing plans, commitments, even budget issues, and really deciding about how to, you know, merge the budget. So I guess that's what I'm confused about, as to when in this governing process, when is that decision made? Or those decisions, sorry.
Well, I think those would be part of the transition committee, which essentially is a committee that would be tasked with implementation of the agreed upon plan. And
So I'm still not clear, Caroline. When do the boards vote and agree to unify, and when can the unions be, you know, addressed in terms of a real? I mean, I'm not clear. It's like there's this jump off point, the leap, the rip the Band-Aid off, whatever analogy or thing you want to use. I'm just not hearing in this discussion when that happens. And I don't want to think that it's because we're unwilling to face that issue. I'm just lost in the conversation.
Deborah, can I try to extend on your question a bit?
How's now? Let's do this. Yeah.
So, and I'm using probably something that's more corporate M&A versus the legal process that we're talking about going through. But just to reiterate what I've heard, at least, is that we have the UTF providing a recommendation to both boards. Both boards then consider the recommendation, do whatever massaging is required to get to the point, presumably, that there's agreement around a plan to unify. I kind of consider that a point of having a letter of intent, or LOI, on both sides. And what we're agreeing to is a plan with the outcome being unification being effective at whatever time that takes. The process in between the letter of intent and the definitive agreement that's signed and we consummate the combination, whatever that looks like, is a process that's really fleshing out all the details in the agreed plan that's been voted on. And that might involve labor unions, it might involve finalizing curriculum, etc., announcements to parents and whatever timelines required. It sounded like, Deborah, what you were saying is there's an assumption that during that post-LOI, pre-definitive agreement or pre-consummation, when all the next level hard work's being done to plan for it, to be able to execute, that there are some things that we could actually do together. And I think you mentioned unions, Deborah, or starting to work through staffing requirements and all that's involved there. I don't know, to Deborah's comment, that was a good question. Are there things that we can't do today that we can do pre-formal merger, post-commitment to a plan in the form of a letter of intent? Are there things that the UTF is aware of that can happen then that can't happen today? From a legal ed code standpoint.
I'm going to defer to Dr. Garcia, but I do my impression based on our task force meetings have been that, when you get down to the nitty gritty of staffing, you really can't do that without, because that involves labor negotiations, et cetera. You really cannot do that without moving into
whatever that next formal stage.
I don't know if a letter of intent would do it. I think not, but I don't know that for sure. It's been my impression that it can't. And that some of the details of budget mergers are also hampered by that.
Okay. So, thank you. I think we're thinking the same question. So.
Yeah. What are the budget? Help me understand. What are the budget questions that we can't answer? I think.
Well, in part, Kurt, those are staffing issues. Because
it's the majority of the budget. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Sure. And so you really can't address those until with that.
It's also timing. If it's September, January, next September, that really impacts your budget analysis.
Right.
So let me return to Deborah's question about is there a target date for the boards taking action? Deborah, is that close to what you were asking?
Well, yes, but I really don't want to push us into this morass of timing, because I think, as you said, Dr. Omowale, we have, there are, while we think that there's a huge lead time between making decisions and, opening as a unified school in September of October of 2021 and September of 2022, it's not a very long time where we have to address a lot of issues. So I don't want to push us into timing, because I think that's going to undo some of the good that's been done tonight. But I do, sure. How are we looking at this governance process, and how will it be changed once the letter of intent, as you put it, is signed, and then the finalization of the merger?
Yeah, or it's the board's adopting the UTF recommendation. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Garcia, you were invited to comment on this point.
Well, actually, I think the trustees did an admirable job with no assistance from me, kind of unpacking the point that I was making, which is just that, that the transition from UTF to transition committee has to be attached to let me rephrase. Let me back off of that. I believe that the correct procedure and process is that the transition from a UTF to transition committee is attached to board action. And so that's why I was calling for a fist of five. It seemed like we had consensus that this was a direction to go in of forming an ad hoc transition committee as a way to start to answer this governance question that's before us. And so my intent was, and now we have 20 minutes left, was to see if we had consensus around that idea and then try to unpack some of the details that need to go into just that idea, right? So, okay, if everybody's behind the general framework of an ad hoc transition committee as being important to this governance conversation, then does that committee have 2 members that sit on the dais with the elected board of trustees? Is it more of a superintendent committee? How do we appoint the people? We've gotten a lot of great ideas out. All I'm simply asking for is, can we narrow the focus on some of those options so we're walking out of the meeting tonight with some clear direction?
Could you then call for an fist of 5 on the formation of an ad hoc transition committee in the way that you've just framed it?
But are they 2 separate? Is it one?
I'd almost rather vote on the whole idea, like what you just framed. And I think Kurt was framing it in a way that, I don't know, made sense. Kurt.
Kurt, you want to take a stab at reframing that?
Yeah.
Rewind the recording.
Yeah.
So I guess what we had talked about was, you have the UTF is getting you to kind of the agreement on a high level plan. You then move to a transition committee that may be a subset of the same board members, but may have different board members. For example, given that people ask me to clarify, I'll push somebody else into a role. So you might say Jim, from a finance standpoint, because the budget's going to be important, he might be part of the transition committee, but we may have members from the unification task force that also play that role. And that team is really charged with working with work groups to come to what we would call a final plan that says, yeah, this is what we're driving against from a budget, from staffing and team, that both boards say, Amanus Dominus, let's go. And then I think post actual merger, you're then going to have more of kind of a sustained transition team that's going to be more people of different parts of the community and different parts of that are really seeing this, right? Because once we make that final agreement, we say, we're going here. We've got like a series of starting lines, right? We've crossed one starting line. That's another starting line in which I think then you need to bring those people together, and that's a broader committee of probably community members, parents, et cetera, that's plugging into the superintendent or the board in general.
And then would you envision an advisory committee separately to the transition committee that could be composed of a variety of community members that might be started at the same time?
Yeah, I think what you look at is you look at either does that transition committee become the advisory committee, kind of evolve, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would think that's probably what you'd want to do, because I think they're going to play an evolutionary role, and you're just calling it transition early on, just as a reminder that we're still in this period of coming together, of merging, of bringing everything together, and they are advising, but they're advising from that perspective early on.
Okay, and then would there be standing reports or members at the dais?
I think you'd want members at the dais, and I think the idea of having a revolving members depending on topics at the time that are topical. I get that's redundant. So topics that are important to be talked about during that time. So maybe we're talking about community engagement, then you have those people there for that period. I think it also gives flexibility to the people on the committee, so they don't have the constant obligation.
So this would be an ad hoc committee, though, but with other members other than board members. So it wouldn't be subject to the Brown Act, open meetings, and no serial meeting communications.
Yeah.
Did you say separate? I mean, it would not include members of the board?
Yeah, it would have members of the board, less than a quorum, but you would have others on the committee. So because it would be an ad hoc committee, but with additional community members or other members, then it would need to be Brown Act, under the Brown Act, and open meetings and no serial meetings and all that.
Okay, so who's tracking this right now so that
Dr. Garcia's
we
got it
come
all.
back around to it?
He's writing feverishly.
All
I
right.
just ask,
Thank you,
so
Kurt.
can
I
I
need.
ask, Itoko, Dr. Garcia and Jim, is there, when does the LOI come in in this process, and or what is the board action that we're asking for in the move from a UTF to a transitional committee? I mean,
Yeah, well, I think that the use of the term LOI, was like from an explanatory
yeah.
standpoint, and is absolutely the right term. If we're talking about corporations, as a publicly elected board and as an appointed board of a public charter school, really what we're talking about is taking board action, and the board action is it would be committing to the outline of a plan, and as Kurt then laid out, forming the transitional committee that works out the details of that plan outline and gets us to the point where we're actually one entity. And then that committee then probably morphs into the longer term advisory board, but begins to function as an advisory board with 2 members on the dais upon its formation, I think. I think that's actually important for this process, and that's pretty close exactly what I was intending to say, although I think perhaps I didn't say it quite as clearly. But that's exactly what I was calling for a fist of 5 on.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Nothing to add to that.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, everybody.
So can we get a fist to 5 on the UTF evolving into a transition committee that has an implementation role that then evolves into a longer-term advisory committee with a specific charge to be determined, of course, in more specific terms later in the life of this process. But yes, I'm just trying to put the general frame on what this conversation where you seem to come. And so, Dr. Garcia, you're the best at calling for the fist of 5s. So could you call for a fist of 5 on this one?
Yeah, I would like to call for a fist of 5 on the plan as we just laid out. I see yay all leads from all trustees. Thank you all for your leadership. And
got a
4.5, Jim.
He doesn't want to be on the committee.
Yeah, as long as he doesn't have to lead it.
I didn't say that.
He just said he didn't want to lead it. He was on the fence about leading it.
Thank you. You guys.
Yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes, and Dr. Garcia, what else? In terms of how you suggest we spend that time, is there anything specific that you want to also pursue?
Well, I'd like to sort of invite anybody to give sort of a final word or reflection, and invite you to actually give us a process observation since we have time in this meeting, and close the meeting down. And I think we'll one topic is perhaps when do we meet again? And now that we have a sort of a framework around governance, what is the next topic that we should approach?
So, Dr. Garcia.
Really quickly, he's asking for three things. You can speak to all or any of them, but your reflections on the meeting, what you think is the next step of the process, and I think those are the two main. And the next meeting, any thoughts on when we should meet again? Any one of those topics that you want to weigh in on? Let's get as many voices as we can. But let me first defer, and I apologize, to Trustee Green.
That's all right, sir. It's all good. Because we are on this virtual platform, it's kind of hard to see. Can you stop sharing your screen, please, Dr. Garcia?
Yes, I can.
I basically just wanted to say that the two boards coming together, this is our third or fourth. It's great. For me, it's time to hear from the public. I know we have a town hall meeting coming up, and we started with maybe 52 people on this meeting. It's like down to 44. I'm ready to hear from the public. That's it.
Marika?
I just wanted to say, I mean, I thought the process of this was great. I think it's helpful at the beginning of a meeting to say, these are the things we want to achieve today. Because what I feel good about is that we came to an agreement about a pretty important piece of this, right? Mm-hmm. Something that's been a bit ambiguous, and we've got clarity. And it's great to end the meeting on clarity and to feel you're progressing a process. So to start out a meeting saying, these are the things that we want to achieve by the end of it, because then we'll drive towards that goal as we did today. And I think that was what I think as a group, I'm proud that we did. And I'd love, and realizing that it takes this length of time to come to a decision on, something that's important. And so we should give it that time, and we should talk through it like we did today, and sort of really pick off one or two things for a meeting that we agree to accomplish, and then we can check off and feel like we can move forward. So that's my feeling about today.
Thank you. Alina?
I think that tonight's meeting was a success. I mean, I really feel like we came together, everyone contributed, and all voices were heard from both boards. And so I'm ready for the next step. Our next meeting, I'm ready for our town hall. You're right, Ida, we need to hear from the public. And so I'm looking forward to our town hall, our next meeting in town hall.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm ready to hear from the public and the teachers, and maybe the students.
Yeah, all three would be great.
And just let you know that we are doing a parallel process with the facilities bond. And that will be coming to our board for resolution if we're able to move forward on that by I think the first week of August. We do have to file by August 7th. So we are working on a parallel process with that for unified plans. We do have a meeting tomorrow night for the ad hoc bond group. It's because we're ad hoc and we're meeting so often, I think 3 times a week for the next few weeks. We are going to be meeting with the work group also, the facilities work group. So just want to let everyone know that we're moving forward on that process as well.
Thank you. Jim, did you have a comment?
Yes, this is a half-baked comment, so I'll preface it that way. Similar to Ida's, and it's, I think it's really important to get input from the public, our community, but in particular, I'd narrow that down to families, caregivers, and teachers. I'm stuck a little bit in my mind, and this is a further conversation that I know we'll have as Willow Creek board members in public meetings, is that, I would feel a lot better informed or directed around how should we invest the next joint study session, to have a bit of a additional input as fiduciaries of the current structure at Willow Creek, to make sure that the direction we're going is consistent with the interests and desires, etc., of the direct group that we have fiduciary responsibility for, considering that we've got a community-wide responsibility as a collaborative group together. And so I would like to have a discussion with the Willow Creek Board to make sure that we're doing the things that are most productive to lead toward that board commitment that we talked about to move into the next phase. And I don't want to get to the point where we don't do the right things now and end up with something that's a surprise or divisive or what have you that pushes back what could be a very smooth process toward a commitment to move on to the next phase. So I just want to throw out in this joint study session a recognition that I think both boards represented here need to think both about our collective direction and the outcome that we both seek, and also how to get there mindful of our current responsibilities. And so I think that's something I'd suggest to the Willow Creek Board, that we actually start having a serious discussion about is there something else we'd like to see, or our families would like to see, to make sure that we continue moving along a really constructive process. I applaud the effort tonight to have a focused conversation around governance. I share the sentiments that this was a really great meeting in terms of achieving a consensus viewpoint on a really important topic. Look forward to the future ones. Yeah.
Thank you. Lexi, you had your hand up earlier?
No, I didn't have anything to say. I just echo what everyone else has said.
Anyone else? Kurt?
Yeah.
And then Bonnie.
Yeah, I think I definitely think that we want to engage parents, and I think that how we do it is going to be really important. I think figuring out ways to do it in multiple channels. We did a parent coffee the other morning around reopening, and just got a lot of open dialogue and positive engagement. And there's going to be another one in a couple weeks. And one thought is we should also maybe do like a joint parent coffee with managed by the maybe by the parent councils or something, to kind of have an engagement with parents, and in that forum, yes, we'll have town halls, but town halls can sometimes be formal. So I think it'd be really good for us to be engaging parents in an active role, because I think what's been great is to see how excited families are to make this happen, and parents are being pretty honest about, here's what I'm worried about, here's what I'm excited about, and so I would encourage us to do it in multiple forums and in multiple ways quickly.
Thank you. Bonnie?
So I'm very thankful about the meeting, and I feel like we made the decision that only we can make as board members, and I'm starting to feel like there are things where we need to sort of, what I heard from the people who participated tonight, and I always appreciate that, is that we need to start moving out of the way, that we need to allow, let unification really start moving. And I will say, I think it's really valuable to have discussions about curriculum and things like that, but honestly, it's the teachers and the principal, the school administrators who will really be able to flesh that out, and other kinds of things. I think that it feels to me that in our study sessions, we've kind of adopted these sort of our basic framework around the STEAM and project-based learning and those kinds of things, and that there's a level where, to my mind, that's where we need to let the committees move in terms of moving ahead and having those discussions. So as I say, I think only we could make the decision about governance, and I really appreciate moving forward at that. So I guess that's my sense. And I hope that whatever discussions that happen, for example, with finance, that we've got to involve the staff that is, working on finance, right? It can't just be a committee structure, and we can't just have curriculum that doesn't involve the teachers and the administrators, and those kinds of things, that we are that we're opening up this more. So I'm all for moving ahead. I'm as quickly as possible, so I will meet with whatever, but I'm not sure what our next point of focus is. And I'm delighted that we're having the unification town halls and other things to hear from the public.
Thank you. Any other board members who would like to comment?
I was just going to say, it sounds like we'll need another meeting after the town hall and coffees and parent teacher public input sessions.
Mm-hmm.
At the last meeting, you agreed to hold a meeting at the end of the month or just beyond, without putting a date on it. So that what you're saying now is pretty consistent with what the thinking was at the last meeting, Carolyn, about the meetings following the community input. Yes. Was it Marika? Did you?
Yeah, I just want to, I wanted to follow up on what Bonnie was saying, that there's a framework. I feel like we still need to flesh out that framework. If I were responding to, if I were a parent or a community member asked to sort of, really think and flesh out some of these things, I don't necessarily think that those frameworks exist for all of those areas of concern. So I think we do need to do a little bit more work to kind of create a skeletal structure where folks can really grapple with the issues in the way that they can best, they're best suited to do. So I do believe we have a little bit more work to do on that front.
Do you have any specific topics or things you want to lift up?
Yeah, it's not necessarily topics. Maybe it's just the work has to be done to perhaps to present the scenarios in a way that's manageable and understandable. So I think that the breadth of the inquiry is there. It's just about perhaps how it's being, shown and talked about in terms of pros and cons. I think that's work has been done very well in some areas and less developed in others. So I just like to sort of see an evening of that out across many of these issues.
Thank you. Bonnie?
And I will say, I do feel like, again, we asked the UTF to frame the guiding principles more. And I think it would be great to come back and really flesh that out and, have more of this discussion. I'm not saying and so thank you, Marika, for clarifying that. I think you're exactly right. I'm not saying our piece is over, but I'm also saying that we do have other people who would be great to get their participation.
Yeah. No, I agree.
We can really, I do think we should focus on governance.
So we're at 5 after. Are there any other board members? Then let me give it back to Dr. Atoko Garcia with one comment. I think that these two boards do us all proud by who you are and what you're doing, the way that you're working on this issue, and the brilliance that you bring to this conversation. Dr. Atoko.
Thank you, Dr. Omo. Yeah, I just want to thank all of you again for your time, your dedication, your commitment, your passion. I was moved tonight by the guiding principles and also by building some consensus around governance. Marika, I do think that there are a few areas left to do this kind of inquiry into. And I know that my fellow members of the UTF and I will meet soon and have a discussion around what those areas are. So look for doodle polls from Steve. And we'll get these meetings on the books in between all of the other meetings, as Caroline said, that we have almost every night. It's a busy summer, but it's the right focus to be busy on, and it's the right work to be doing in this day and age. And I just, again, want to thank you all for leaning into the opportunity to show and prove that a community that has wrestled with all of the issues that are in the national headlines right now can come up with a solution that can be a model for the rest of our country. It's an honor to be a part of this with you all, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. You know what? You are so correct. And at some point, we have got to get out of our own way so that this work can move ahead. Because, yes, it's daunting, it's hard, it's a challenge, it's all those things. But at the end of the day, it's the TK through 8th graders who are sitting in those classrooms. It's the teachers. It's the certificated and the classified. It's the janitors and the cafeteria staff and on and on and on, who we are here doing this so that that part can happen. And we are at a crossroads that I hope we continue to push. I'm ready to kick the boulder down the hill. I'm tired of pushing it up the hill.
Amen.
You know, we got to get out of our way.
I just want to
Dr.
thank
Garcia.
Dr. Garcia, if I could interrupt for a second. Thank Dr. Garcia for your tireless leadership, the time that you took while you were traveling and on vacation, and the way you ground all of us and honor the work is something that means a lot, I think, to me, and I think I can speak for everybody. So thank you.
I totally concur, Caroline.
Totally concur.
We'll owe him those days, believe me. We owe you those days. I just wanted to say before other comments that you were going to remind us of our homework on the guiding principles. I think there was some discussion around that to take our guiding principles and put it in a framework that talks about, finish the sentence. So you'll remind us on that.
Yeah, thank you, actually, Ida, for that. The ask was if you all would take the guiding principles that you offered and take a stab at crafting them into sort of a coherent statement, and then to email them to me, and then I'll bring those back to the UTF, and we'll do some refining and bring them back to the whole group.
Thank you, Shar.
And I want to give it back to the two chairs to then make any closing comments and adjourn.
I'll revert to Mr. Weinsheimer before
Ida, I think everybody has said what needs to be said. I think we're moving in a great direction. So let's close this baby.
All right, sounds good. Dr. Satterwire, thank you so much, sir, for your expertise in moving this along. I cannot wait to see what your screen is going to be for the next time we meet. Hopefully we'll get a 70s theme in there.
We will need a motion to adjourn, President Green.
Yeah, I'll move the adjourn.
Second.
It has been moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr.
Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn the joint study session?
I move we adjourn the joint study session.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned, folks. 8:08 p.m.